Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ted Dacko with Accelerant. Thank you for joining our webinar today. And I'm going to introduce our guest panelists in just a second. The title of the webinar is Why Budgeting is Mission Critical and What You Can Do About That. Just a couple of issues in terms of some housekeeping issues. You are all in listen-only mode. You may type questions in the dialog box on your right-hand side. And a little bit later on, we will try to answer as many of the questions as we possibly can. And if we can't get your questions today, we will certainly follow up with you after the webinar. It is important for me to note that while this webinar is being put on by the company Accelerant, and we have a product for budgeting called Budget Pack, it is not intended to be a commercial for our product. But I do need to point out that both of our panelists today utilize that product, so if there are examples, they will be referring to that. But we are trying to focus the issue more on problems inherent in small and medium-sized organizations in the budget process rather than focus on our product or our company. If you are interested in anything that you hear today in the webinar, we would be happy to follow up with you after the fact. There will be no product demonstrations or anything like that. And for the most part, on the screen, we will simply be showing a screen of who is talking as opposed to anything in terms of presentation material for the most part. Our agenda is a 5-part agenda today. I'd like to tell you a little bit about who we are, what we do. I would like to introduce the panelists to you. And then the way it's going to work is I'm going to ask the panelists some questions. These are not prearranged questions in that this is scripted. They know generally the concepts we're going to talk about. And then after I finish that, and maybe in a half an hour or so, 40 minutes or so, we would like to start asking questions that audience members had as part of this as well. And then finally, we will do a wrap-up and talk about some next steps. So who is the sponsor today? Well, Accelerant is a cloud-based software company. We build and implement innovative, practical, and powerful budget preparation, forecasting, and management reporting software. The focus of the organization is to energize a culture of budget accountability with users, and we are very proud of the fact that we focus on that. And we have customers in a variety of industries. Obviously, 2 of them are on the line today. And if you're interested in learning more about the company, the products, the services, by all means, as I said, get in touch with us afterwards, or we will follow up with you. Now, what I've asked the panelists to do is I'm going to introduce them individually, and then I'd ask them to describe a little bit about themselves, their situation, the companies or the organizations they are with, and then we'll start the panel discussion. So let me start with Brad. Brad Bertsch is a senior accountant with Brotherhood Mutual Insurance Company. Good afternoon, Brad.
Good afternoon, Ted. Thanks for having me on the call.
Well, my pleasure. So tell me a little bit about yourself, your organization, and anything else you'd like to do as an introduction.
Sure, no problem. Like Ted said, my name is Brad Bertsch. I've been in the accounting field for about 8 years now, all in the insurance industry. I've been with Brotherhood Mutual for about 5 years. And the first couple of years I was with the company, I did some accounting for its affiliates and stuff not related to the corporate environment. But a couple years ago, I was promoted to work in the corporate side of Brotherhood. And one of the first things that was part of my job description is we got to figure out a way to do budget different and to make it more of an important part of our company organization, the culture, a focus, because we're kind of in as a company, a little bit of a transition from being a small company to more of a, even though it's important for small companies, as you grow, it becomes really important to make sure you're maximizing the bottom line. And so that was one of the first things that I was tasked to do in my new role, was to take a look and review our budget process and see what we need to do different. Brotherhood Mutual is a been around a long time, but just in the past few years, it's experienced a lot of growth. We're now in almost all 50 states. I think we're at 45 or 46 currently. But our main product is property and casualty insurance, and our main customers are churches and related ministries. So.
And remind me where Brotherhood is located.
We're located our headquartered in Indiana.
Okay.
So, but like I said, we have business in 45 or 46 out of the 50 states. So.
And roughly how many employees?
We have about 350 employees, and that does not include our insurance agents, which are independent.
Okay, very good. And not to put the cart before the horse, but when you do your budget process, how many people does that touch?
Oh, about 35 people in the organization.
Okay, very good. Anything else before we move over to John?
Nope, that's about it for the history for me.
All right. John Louw is a financial analyst with Georgia Municipal Association. Very different geography, very different business. So, John, tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization. And then, first of all, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Ted. As Ted has introduced me already, my name is John Louw. I'm a financial analyst. I work for the Georgia Municipal Association. I've actually been here for about 3 years now, and I've had a very different sets of roles of all different parts of the organization, dealing with accounting and finance as a whole. A lot of people would think, what on earth would a Georgia Municipal Association do? Well, to give you an indication, our whole purpose is to work for the cities, and we provide a wide range of services for them. And this could vary anywhere from insurances, like Brad's Brotherhood Mutual does, to a retirement plan, to legal advice or lobbying services, or to different types of small organizational management and different types of things, for anything and everything that we can possibly think of to try and help improve cities in the state of Georgia. I'm currently located, and our company is located in Atlanta, Georgia. We are a nonprofit, and as kind of with Brad, as I got charged this last year after working hand in hand with my CFO for the budget process, was to find ways to improve it and enhance it over the future, because it's always important to try and advance anything you could possibly do.
And how many employees do you have?
We have just under 100 employees.
Okay. And how many people touch the budget process at Georgia Municipal?
We have approximately 25 different people that actually touch the budgeting process.
Okay, so one is 25 and the other one is 35, which is a relatively good number. Okay, very good. So let's begin the discussion, and these are some of the topics that we want to try to explore today. Not treating budget as mission critical in organizations, budgeting to strategy versus budgeting to history or politics, trying to engage department heads in the budget process, providing flexibility to users to allow them to budget their departments the way they think about them, viewing the budget process solely as a financial function as opposed to what it's intended to be in terms of a communications function, doing budgeting once a year, and then how to get the concept better sold inside the organization. So, Brad, let me start with you by asking, why do you consider budgeting a mission-critical application at Brotherhood Mutual?
Yeah, so as with any business, our business is concerned with the bottom line. And, there's really two ways to better your bottom line. You can either do it on the top by increasing your sales and your revenues, or you can do it on the bottom by reducing budget or making sure everybody's accountable for their budget, and making sure that what you're putting in a budget is reasonable and it would be as expected, so that you're not your strategy, your expectations aren't far off for the bottom line. So that would be the first reason that I feel like budgeting is critical for our organization. The second is it helps to guide your organization. Every year when we go through the annual budget process, we're looking at, okay, how much is it really going to cost? What should we put in the budget for this certain strategy? If we move in this direction, what's it going to cost us for the next year for sure, and then sometimes, further out, 3 to 5 years. And so I feel like it's kind of a guide, and also obviously it serves as an approval process for areas that are growing, people that need to hire, different strategies or departments that might be taking on new projects. Where can the budget be instrumental in guiding that process and making sure that you're doing what's best for your organization and the strategy, because the two definitely need to be tied together. So I would say those are the top 2 reasons that I feel like our budget process is critical to the organization.
And John, how about you from a perspective of a not-for-profit? Do you consider this a mission-critical application, and why?
Yeah, we certainly consider it a mission-critical activity, and the main reason for us is although we're non-for-profit and we're not so concerned with the bottom line, but we're very concerned with long-term viability. If you don't have a budget in place and if you don't have plans in place, next thing you know, any type of reserve that you have gets eaten away, and then next thing you know, you're 3 years down the line and you're running yourself out the door trying to scramble for revenues to try and stay in business. And from the nonprofit standpoint, is if you don't have an idea of what you're doing, where you're going, it becomes a huge problem, and it would prevent you from your actual mission and your goals.
Okay. Thank you, folks. I'm also joined by Joanne Brunn today, who's the Executive Vice President of Client Services and Product Development. She's going to be assisting today. Would like to ask a polling question of the audience. Joanne, do I need to do anything specific, or you take over from here?
No, I will launch the first poll. Do you want to tee that up?
Yeah, we would like to know from the audience members whether you consider budgeting mission-critical function or application in your organization today. So go ahead.
Okay.
And we'll give this a couple of minutes or so, or a couple of seconds for people to answer the poll.
It looks like almost everybody voted.
Okay.
We'll give a couple up, a little bit more, give it one more second, and then you'll probably not be surprised at the answer. Would you like me to share the results?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, so Ted, as you can see, 100% considered budgeting mission critical.
Okay, very good. Actually, I can't see that on my screen, but okay, great. Thank you. All right. So, John, while we're talking to you, how did you used to do budgeting? What did you use? How did you do it?
We actually used to use very complex Excel spreadsheets. We used to have each department had their own spreadsheet. Each spreadsheet had multiple tabs inside of it for each of the different units that we had to budget for. And then we would send those out to our department heads for them to actually do their budgeting, put their numbers in, then we'd have to bring it back in and we'd have to consolidate it so we could actually do reporting on the end. It's actually very time consuming from a finance side of actually having to get all of it and consolidate all the numbers back.
Were you worried about errors?
Oh, of course. We actually had, in the last 3 years that we've done budgeting, we had 3 different errors that could range from something as simple as, oh, it's only $500, to something as serious as we had one that $25,000 just went poof and vanished in a budget. So errors were plenty when you're using Excel and you're trying to do linked spreadsheets, and it is just not a long-term way to actually budget.
And what general ledger system do you use, or which ERP system do you use?
We use Great Plains.
Okay. And they didn't have budgeting capabilities built into that general ledger, right?
No, not from default. They have the ability to track it, but not really the ability to budget in it. If that makes any sense.
Yep, it does. It does. And did you have data rekeying that you had to do as part of the budget process as well, or was it pretty much mechanical from transferring from spreadsheet to spreadsheet electronically?
It was some keying because the spreadsheets that we sent out to the end users would always get corrupted, so we had to manually key and check, transfer it into the true linked spreadsheets, and that's just another location to where it's just as simple as you miss a line and you have a new error. Or if you add a new account, you didn't carry it through all your spreadsheets, so you have a new error. Mm-hmm. It's been a headache, to say the least.
Yeah. And did you do personnel planning at the individual level as well, so that you were planning people by department?
Yes, we did. We do planning by person, by department, where we would split them up based on their roles and their determinations, and it was by person, and where we even did all the way down to their benefits, all by the person level. So we do a very complicated personnel budgeting.
Okay, Brad, what did you use? Were you an Excel shop as well?
Yeah, very much so. In fact, when John was talking about their process, it sounded like we worked for the same company almost. We had many different Excel spreadsheets. You know, obviously, if we have 35 involved, we're probably going to have about that many spreadsheets that we would send out, and the users would fill them in, and we had them locked down, and so that, you know, they couldn't change them at all. There was no flexibility whatsoever. And year to year, you'd have maybe a new person come into a different role, and they'd have to try to figure out how to use these locked down spreadsheets, and needless to say, it was very frustrating on their end, having to work in Excel, because many of them weren't used to Excel. They weren't you know, like a member of finance where you're used to using Excel all the time. And then similar to John, we'd get them all back, and we'd run macros and links, and we'd try to consolidate them all. And over the years, we didn't have a ton of errors, but we definitely had an instance or two where it would have been nice to have something with more control over the process that would automatically roll up your budget. But yeah, very tedious, very time-consuming, and like I said, we had some controls, but definitely not to the level that a system with, you know, budget intelligence would have. And also along that lines, we did head count planning through the budget process, and that was very, very difficult to, on an individual level, transfer, you know, changes in head count, changes in salaries, promotions into a budget dollar amount. That took a significant amount of time doing that because, you know, obviously, you know, Excel does not have any budget intelligence necessarily built into it. You have to teach it everything it does. So,
how about equipment planning?
Similar.
Were you doing equipment planning as part of the budget process as well?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so people were making requests for potential things that they might want to purchase next year and put that into the approval workflow.
Correct. Yep.
All right. So, Brad, while we're on you, well, you know, I'm curious as to what was the motivation to switch from Excel into something more powerful. You know, basically, you know, a lot of people would say, yeah, but Excel is free. What would cause Brotherhood Mutual to want to make a switch out of a process that was relatively free?
Right. Really came down to three things. I would say were the main drivers. As I was reviewing the budget process and working with my superiors to figure out, you know, do we need to make a change? Is Excel just not the right thing for us? It really came down to three things were driving it. And the first thing was accountability. In Excel, you lose a lot of accountability. And when I say accountability, I mean it kind of in two ways. In one way, you lose accountability because there's no way to track where someone's at in their budget process. You know, you might send it out and you might not hear anything. You don't even know whether they got it necessarily. Whereas, you know, something in a system, you're able to be proactive and see, you know, the status of where they're at in their budget, what they've worked on. You're able to, you know, run reports right off what they've done so far to see, okay, it looks like they've completed this and they're on track, or see this guy over here hasn't even started. I need to reach out to him because, you know, he should have started by now. And it really, using Excel puts you behind because there's no accountability on when they start. And then on the back end, it seems like the accountability was lacking as far as for the numbers. You know, we've heard the old common thing you hear is, well, I don't think that was my number that I put in there. I sent finance something different. I think they changed it. And so, you know, a system really gives you the ability to have the user accountable for what they put in, because finance isn't changing the numbers. You know, the system is rolling it up and showing a report, but we're not changing anything. You guys put it in. You guys can see exactly what you did. So that was probably the first driver. And the second one was the lack of budget intelligence related to headcount. And the manual process it was for finance to be able to go through and convert, everybody's plan for their head count, their new hires, their compensation increases, promotions, into a budget dollar amount, because they're looking at it. A manager is looking at their budget, individual by individual. This person's going to be promoted. This person needs this increase. This person needs this increase. And to move that from looking at it on an individual level to putting it into budget dollars was a very manual process. And like you said, even for equipment, it was manual as well. And then the third thing was the users didn't like it either. From a finance perspective, we didn't like it because it was a lot of work and it was very tedious. And from a user perspective, they didn't like it either because many of them didn't know Excel. They didn't know how to use Excel. We would try to show them, oh, you got to do this, and then it would just be more work on our end. Whereas if you can come up with a system that's much more user friendly, where they feel like they're going through a questionnaire, you know what I mean? They're doing something that's natural, something that they're used to doing, like maybe something they might, something that has budget intelligence built into it, where it can ask them, hey, when is this person going to get their raise? How much should they get? They just put in 3%, whatever it is, and it moves right on and calculates the budget dollars in the background without having to mess with anything manually in the spreadsheet. So definitely our users were very on board with getting something different besides Excel. Those would be probably the main three drivers that caused us to move away from Excel and move to something different.
All right, John. What caused your organization to say, okay, that's enough. We're gonna do something a little more sophisticated than that?
Brad actually hit on a couple of them. The end user experience was a big key. One of the big keys for us is because he's exactly right. When you have users working through spreadsheets, a lot of them, they're not used to it. They don't like it. So that was one of our big motivations. But one of the other ones that hit us more to home than Brad is we wanted a system that would automatically roll everything up, and it would eliminate possibility of errors. Because as I said in my introduction when we were talking about the Excel, is we got hit a couple different times with errors, and using a software that does it for you, it automatically does your roll-ups. It automatically takes care of everything. That means if one department does it, it rolls it all up so you don't miss it in a summary. And, between errors and user experience, those were two of our big reasons for actually changing our process from moving from Excel to a actual budgeting system instead.
All right, and then, gentlemen, John, while we're on you, do you think the old process was more limiting for finance, for users, or for management in terms of their lack of ability to actually get questions answered on time? What was the limitation? What was the impact of the limitation the most?
I think the biggest limitation was on the end users because they didn't want to, they'd say they would have the numbers in, they would put them in, but then, exactly as Brad said, they would come in back and say that that's not the numbers they picked. Mm-hmm. That's not the numbers they used. Beyond that, the next biggest one would be management, because you couldn't do quick reports and roll-ups of things. Like once you got all the information back, you had to spend time to consolidate it all and actually produce a roll-up. So it was very slow and cumbersome to actually provide management reports. From a standpoint, I think finance had it easiest because we were all used to Excel and knew how to use it.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like you bought the product more for the constituents in the budget process than for yourself. I'm sorry, Brad. How about you? How would you answer that? What was more limiting?
Yeah, I would definitely say the users complain the most. In finance, we were somewhat proud of the way were able to consolidate it in Excel and had all these fancy things going on, and the users, they didn't like it whatsoever. And management, like you mentioned, they wanted reports quicker than they got them, and they wanted to be able to see where people were at. When is this budget going to be done? Because we gave it to them 2 weeks ago, and we have no idea if we're going to get it back. We told them in 2 weeks. We'd have no idea if we're going to get it back at then, or if they haven't even started looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
And so from management perspective, definitely visibility into progress was important for them. And then, in finance, it definitely saves us time. That's for certain.
Okay, let's poll the audience again, Joanne. Ask the audience what they think of in their current process. Are the limitations more in the area, in the finance area, and for the department heads, or for management of the organization? Do you have that poll question ready to go?
Yep, it's up. Okay, I'll just give folks another minute to wrap up. Okay, just one more. Okay, here we go. All right, let me close the poll and share it. And we have, so who suffers most from the limitations of Excel? 25% finance, 38% users, and 38% management.
Got it. Okay. Very good. Thank you, everyone, for responding to that. So, Brad, when you were relates to the question that we just asked, only it's slightly different. Looking at potential solutions, what was more interesting to you? Obviously, you have to have base level functionality in any application area that you look at, right? If you don't have base level functionality, it doesn't mean anything. But were you looking for advanced functionality, the best user experience for the department heads, or cost of product as your main criteria? Which of those three would you say was the most important to you, and why?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't cost of the product. That was kind of maybe an elimination factor if it was way out of our limits. But it was definitely the first two, either the functionality or the end user experience. And working with you guys in the beginning when we were implementing it, you'd probably say ours was advanced functionality because we said, hey, can it do this? We want to be able to do this. Can it do this? And so definitely functionality was important to us because we didn't want to feel like we were having to do the same amount of work as we were doing in Excel, because like you said earlier, Excel is free. It's hard to beat that. But cost necessarily wasn't something that was going to make one system stick out above another.
Mm-hmm.
And the user experience obviously was important. We wanted to find something that would make our users happy because they'd been dealing with Excel for years and years and years, and we're really tired of it. And we had been promising, we're going to get something that's a lot more user-friendly, that's easier for you. And even in only using it in the short amount of time we've used it, we found that users really like it compared to Excel, that's for certain.
Okay. And John, which of those criteria was most important to Georgia Municipal Association?
Mine's actually very similar to Brad's. My number one when we were looking was functionality, because it had to be able to do what we needed it to do in our budgeting process, and we were rather complex, so we had to have the functionality. Almost hand in hand to that is we had to have a user experience that was acceptable for our users, and to be able to potentially provide the best user experience would be the most ideal. But if that cut into the functionality, we would have picked, functionality was our biggest key, because as I agree with Brad, is we didn't want to have to cut out and do things in a different way just because the system couldn't handle it. And cost, of course, was the last one, but yet again, as with Brad, is like if it was completely outrageous, that breeds a different story, because as we all agree, Excel is free, and it's hard to beat free.
Yeah. Let's poll the audience and ask them in terms of, not that the audience members are necessarily looking for a new budget system, but what would be the most important thing for them? Would it be advanced functionality? Obviously, based on level functionality has to be assumed here. The experience for the end users, or cost. So, Joanne, could you launch that poll?
Okay, it is launched.
And while their audience is responding to this, since cost was not your main issue, it sounds like we didn't charge you enough. So cost,
I think you charge us enough.
Yeah, I think we did too.
I won't disagree with Brad there. I think he did charge us just enough.
All right, there you go. Thanks.
All right, just
Are we
give
in?
me one more second. Okay, I think we're good. Let's close this and share that. So we have 43% of the people voted for advanced flexibility or advanced functionality is the most important, 57% for user experience, and nobody for cost.
Ah,
So kind of the same as what Brad and John were saying.
okay, very good. Now, neither of you are really small organizations, but you're bordering on the upper end of small to the to mid-sized organizations. A couple of things: are there unique challenges in the budgeting process to smaller organizations, and is there always, talk to me about the pressure for improving the financial performance. So, John, I'll start with you. First of all, do you understand the question? And if I need to ask it again, are you good?
No, I'm good. To me, with most small businesses and what I've seen in a lot of them, because I've worked at a few others as well, is you try to do as much as possible with as few people as you can possibly get away with. So one of the big keys is you have to be very, very efficient in your processes in any way, shape, or form. So you got to find a way to make everything as efficient as you possibly can. And being a small business, you don't have the luxury of being able to say, I can go shell out and hire 4 new people to actually do a process that you could potentially have a system do if you just had the time to implement it. So finding a way to be efficient I've always found has been a key in small to mid-sized businesses.
All right. And Brad, talk to me about Brotherhood Mutual, and same question for you, unless you don't have anything to add.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is an error. The smaller you are, the bigger an error becomes. So a $500 miss, or let's say a 500, or maybe like John mentioned, a $5,000 to $10,000 miss for our size of company is not going to be the end of the world. But the smaller you are, that becomes more and more important.
From a vendor perspective, I will tell you that the smaller the organization, the more difficult the implementation happens to be, and the more critical it is to that institution. We have Fortune 500 organizations whose budget process is pretty simplistic, and they don't have the same needs as a smaller organization. So it turns out that it is somewhat upside down in terms of the complexity and the importance of the budget process from the size of the organization. Brad, does your organization have a strategic plan?
Yeah, it sure does.
And are you budgeting to the strategic plan, or were you budgeting to the strategic plan, or did you find your people were budgeting to politics or history? In other words, what we did last year or what they wanted to do rather than the organizational strategy?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned before, we're kind of in a state of transition as a company, moving from a smaller company to more of a mid-sized company. And as a smaller company, I feel like sometimes you can get away with budgeting on history more. Hey, we spent this last year. We're not going to change that much. Let's just do the exact same thing in the budget, and it's not going to impact our strategy. It's not going to impact where we're going as a company as much. But as you start to grow, I feel like your strategy needs to tie in with your budget more and more and more. And so that's where, that was one of the defining factors when we decided to move from Excel, where we were saying, we're going to, on a cash basis, we're going to be paying this amount in this month, and we're going to be paying this amount in this month, and putting those amounts in there to saying, okay, we have this project next year that could cost us this much if we do it. Let's implement it as part of our budget and see what falls out. We have this much advertising dollars, or maybe we have 3 advertising people that we want to hire next year. How does that fall out in the bottom line? And looking at the strategy of our company and trying to make ourselves more out there from a marketing perspective. So definitely the implementation of a system, one of the main goals is to make sure your strategy is tying in with your budget. And we're not totally there yet as a company, but we're definitely making strides. So.
All right. And John, does the Georgia Municipal Association have a strategy?
We do. Strategy, of course, varies for what we do because ours are more like long-term. How can you always provide betterment for our members and our cities? And it becomes hard because they're not so clear as it can be in some other cases. But Brad's absolutely right that you need to tie your budgeting into actually being a strategy because otherwise you won't be able to do what you want to do. And we are just like him as we've struggled and found out that we pretty much budget the history and budget very rarely based on new strategy types because our strategy doesn't evolve very often or fast. And that's something that we're hoping in the future changes to being strategy-based budgeting instead of history-based.
Yeah, I'm, there's no pictures of us up there on the screen right now, so you can't tell, or maybe you can tell, but I've been at this for 40 years. I started in this field in 1974, and I've always thought that the role of the budget is to fund the organizational strategy for the next fiscal year, and that's the primary role of it. And yet when in some of my past lives working for larger companies, it was more around what did we do in the past rather than how we're going to fund the strategy. So I'm glad to see you're both moving in that direction, and we would certainly concur. We have another polling question for the audience, and that one is, do you believe, this is a gut feel, do you believe your organization currently budgets to strategy, to politics, or to history? So, Joanne, would you launch that for us, please?
Okay, the poll is open, so folks could please vote.
Well, we're getting some strategy in there.
All right, okay. We'll give it one more. There we go. It looks like history's winning out.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Let me close the poll and share the results. So we have 71% budgets to history most commonly and 29% to strategy. Nobody picked politics.
Interesting. Thank you for that information, folks. And okay. I said earlier that this is not going to be a commercial for Budget Pack, and obviously you folks had choices in the marketplace, and I'm sure you all looked at multiple products as well. But what were the three major things in a budgeting product that you were looking for from a features and function perspective? What was the most important to you? And John, I'll start with you.
One of the most important things for us when we were looking was to get this at least the same level of functionality we got out of Excel in our budgeting software. Because if we wanted to be able to at least budget the same way we've done, just in a more consolidated and ease of use manner. One of the second things that we always were looking for was how could it be easier for the users to actually budget and approve it and sign off and then be able to take the responsibility for the numbers that they actually provided. And then lastly was just overall just an application that was web-based so that people didn't have to have special software loaded onto their computers, or they could just go from any computer and access it. Was our third and final key on that.
And your IT department was fine with a web-based solution?
They became at ease with it over time. They were happy not to have to actually do too much about having to worry about a cloud-based system and have to actually devote their resources to it. So they, once they actually reviewed the documents and took a look at it, they were fine with it.
All right. Brad, what were the top three things that you were looking for in terms of features?
One of them, like we talked about earlier, was making it easier for our users. They've been dealing with Excel spreadsheets for a long time, and we wanted to find something. And the one thing that really attracted us to Budget Pack was the TurboTax-like feel of the system. where you're going through and you're answering questions, and you get to this item, and you have different drivers you can use. You have different ways of budgeting besides just plug your numbers in that cell. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And that was one of the main things that was driving us to do something different. Another one was reporting. We didn't have any good way to report actuals to budget or report off different strategies, different actions the company wanted to take, whereas a system would definitely allow that a lot easier than Excel was. I mean, we were getting reports, we were doing reports, but it wasn't easy and it wasn't fast. And so those were probably two things that we were looking at a lot when looking at different budget systems.
We, as a vendor, we use the word strategy from two different contexts, and you touched on the second one. We talked about budgeting to strategy, but also budgeting is a strategic application in the organization. And you mentioned something that's kind of important as well to the audience, and that is if your goal is a mechanical process of putting numbers on a spreadsheet, you should stay in Excel. But if you're actually trying to make budgeting more strategic and get the best thinking out of your department heads so that you can then, I'll use the second context, budget to strategy, that's when it becomes more interesting to start considering alternatives. Brad, I noticed that you didn't mention cloud-based. Any reason for that? Was that not an issue, or not? Didn't it matter to you, or?
It's one of those things that now we realize is really nice, but at the time it wasn't one of the pressing things. Is, hey, we need to get something out there where they can, use it from any place, anywhere, and we don't have to worry about our IT resources because IT hadn't been involved in the past. It was all finance driven, and cloud-based obviously still doesn't use IT, so that's a good thing.
And the application. So what you're saying is the application right now requires zero IT resources for you, or very little, or what would you say?
Yeah, the only thing we've ever used IT for was asking them if they were okay if we did a cloud-based budget pack solution, and they were fine with it. They said, hey, that's actually what we prefer, and if you want us to manage passwords, we can do that because they do that with some of the other applications. But other than that, there was no installing, there was no housing it on a server, there's no putting it on people's computer, there's nothing like that. You just send the link out and people can go out and access it anywhere, anytime.
Interesting. All right, so let's do our final poll for the afternoon. I'm curious as to what the audience thinks about cloud-based computing and whether they are supportive, not supportive, or they simply don't know. So, Joanne, would you launch that? And this is the last time we'll ask you for a poll out in the audience.
Okay, so it's launched, so if everyone could please vote.
Yes, no, maybe means yes, I'm supportive of cloud-based. No, I'm not supportive. Maybe means I don't know or I don't have an opinion.
All right, we'll just give a few more seconds. And all right, so let me close this and share it. So we have 83% supportive of cloud-based and 17% not supportive and no maybes.
Okay, very good. The 17% that said no, we will not be following up with you. Just kidding. All right. Brad, let's stay with that theme of IT support. You don't even use IT support to pass information back and forth between your general ledger system and your payroll system and the budget product? You can do that internally with finance?
Absolutely, yeah. I can run reports right off our GL that are take only a few minutes to manipulate. Go ahead and log into the cloud-based system as the administrator. Press a few buttons, and I've got my link all hooked up, and we're good to go. And then anybody at that time can go out and look at their actual to budget reports and see where they come out, see where they need to cut, see where they have room.
Very impressive. John, do you use any IT support part of the application?
No, we're very similar to Brad. We don't use any IT support whatsoever. as I said, when we were actually originally looking at it, they wanted to take a look at the documents to make sure everything made through from an IT point of view, but the whole implementation was done through finance. The current operations of everything is done through finance, and 0 IT resources are ever having to be allocated to this currently.
All right. Well, thank you for that. What I'm going to do, incidentally, this is just a quote from the Wall Street Journal that we put up from time to time. It supports what you folks were saying a little earlier, but it's kind of important. And that is that, at a time when people are used to well-designed apps from companies like Google and Apple, in their personal lives, they don't have a lot of patience for workplace applications that leave them confused. So according to the CIO Journal, functionality is no longer the definition of success. Usability is the key. And Michael Krigsman goes on to say, basically, users accept less crap today when it comes to software. So thought I'd throw that quote in. Let me ask you some questions that were asked by audience members now. So I'll sort of move from my questions to audience member questions. Did you folks, when you switched your budget process, did you look at other products? Brad, did you look at anything else? And you don't have to mention the products, but
we looked at 3 different ones.
All right.
And the bottom line when why we picked Budget Pack was the user-friendly approach. That was the main driver for us.
All right, John, did you look at anything else?
Yeah, we originally looked at, and we had about 6 or 7 we were originally looking at, and then we quickly shuffled that down to about 3, and then in the end it actually got shuffled down to 2, and in the end we had two different options that were pretty much providing 2 different types of interfaces, and one said we have a better user interface, one potentially may have had a little bit better functionality, and in the end we chose user interface over functionality.
All right, very good. Here's an interesting question. Did you guys have a budget to do this? I mean, did somebody say, all right, there's a budget, go off and find a new budgeting system, or did you make the budget? Did you make the budget to buy the budget product after you made a decision that you wanted to buy a budget product? Does that make sense?
It does.
And John, I'll start with you.
Is that starting with me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. When I was first told to actually go look, I wasn't given any budget whatsoever. And once I got some initial quotes out there, and because I had never actually done software purchasing for our organization before, I became a little concerned over the price. And then I basically asked, I was like, what's a potential number for it? And when I was talking to my CFO, who in the end made the actual had to be the final one sign off on my recommendation, and he pretty much told me that all my options were within budget. But I never knew what that actual number was.
All right. Brad?
Yeah, we had an idea in our head, and actually in the budget for the year of what we wanted to spend on a new system. And like I mentioned earlier, as long as we were within those limits per se, then we were good to go.
All right. Now, the next question relates to this one. How did you get this approved and funded? Anything that you would add based on what you've said so far? I think people are worried about the approval process inside their organizations and how they would get this done. Anything that you would advice you would give them?
Yeah, the only thing I would say is enlist support of the users. Our users had been dealing with Excel and were really tired of it. And every year we heard, when are we going to get something different? And so in order to justify the cost, it was pretty easy whenever, 30 members of your organization that were dreading the budget process every year can say, hey, this really isn't as bad anymore. You know what I mean?
It's so funny. That's the very next question. How did you involve your users in the selection process, or did you?
Mine actually is a little bit different than that. For me, it was pretty much just me and my CFO making the choice. And pretty much if he agreed with me, that was the selection we were going to be making. And sometimes, although I agree, enlist the users to get your support, but sometimes if you know the person who can make the choice, convince them, and then that makes it all the much easier. And once I had Ronnie, my CFO, convinced, it was pretty much a done deal.
Uh-huh.
And unfortunately, we did not actually include our users specifically in the process of selecting it, but we did think of their needs as part of the process.
All right. John, while we got you with the last question or comment, do you have any advice for the audience members who might be interested in upgrading their budget process? Any advice that we haven't talked about today?
I would suggest to all of them is to look at a whole bunch of different options and find one that actually works for you, because there's no guarantee that one software will work better for you than another, and in some cases, certain softwares do not work for individuals depending on what you're actually trying to go for. So map out your strategy of what your budgeting software is going to be doing for you, and then find the software that best actually utilizes your strategy on what you want it to do, and go with that one.
Very good advice. I've been at this for 40 years, and there is no such thing as a perfect product, including the one that I market right now. So good advice. Brad, anything that you would like to add to the audience?
No, I think we pretty much covered it all. I mean, I agree with John that you need to find out what's most important to you. Why are you wanting to switch? And based on that, we'll determine what kind of product you need. And as far as one of the key things, I think it's important that you, as your company grows, as your company changes, it's important to tie your strategy into the budget as best as you can and move that direction, because I think that's the way we're headed in the economy. So that's pretty much my advice.
All right. Well, thank you. Wrap up and next steps from our side. This is a mission critical application. I think we've understood that it can effectively be done in Excel. ERP systems are transaction-based systems that focus on control. Budgeting is an end-user application that focuses on account balance, flexibility, and those things are wildly different. The participants today sort of gave the advice, focus on the needs of the users in what we like to consider a TurboTax-like interface. And remember, as John just said, and your organizations are unique in their requirements, as are your individual people, and you have to make sure that you focus on the uniqueness of the individual and not necessarily treat all the people the same. Budgeting is as much a communication process as a financial one. People think of it as purely a financial one, but if you're actually budgeting to strategy, the communications process of how you're supporting the strategy is very important. Speaking of that, budgeting to strategy of the organization is more important than budgeting to history or politics. Garbage in, garbage out. So make sure that you are focusing on helping people prepare the best budget possible. And as I just said earlier, perfection is the enemy of the good. There is no such thing as a perfect product. Searching for one will be an exercise in frustration for you. So here's a simple model for should you change your process. The first question to ask is, are you happy? If the answer is yes, keep doing what you're doing. If the answer is no, then ask the second question. Do you want to be happy? If the answer is no, then keep doing what you're doing. If the answer is yes, then you're going to need to change something. The next step for us is, by all means, visit our website, www.accelerant.com. You can sign up for our blog. We actually try to cover topics that are important to people who do budgeting as opposed to focus on product in the blog. We do have case studies out on our website which might help you understand how other organizations approach this individual problem. There will be a recorded version of this and many other webinars on our website if you would like to learn more about the topic, and we invite you to take advantage of some free consulting or consultation from Accelerant. So we are done. With that, I would like to first thank you, Brad, for your participation. It was very helpful, and thank you for participating.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me on the...
No problem. And John, I'd like to also thank you for your participation. And you folks are about to go into the budget cycle or probably already in it. So John, first of all, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ted. And yes, we are actually knee-deep in our cycle right now.
All right. Well, go back to budgeting, folks, and good luck with your organizations. And again, folks, we thank you for attending the webinar today, and hopefully you found this both educational and enjoyable. And with that, we bid you, and Joanne, thank you as well for helping.
My pleasure.
All right. Well, thank you, folks, and have a pleasant afternoon. Bye now.